Greetings all, Ferrariman 601 here. On the 20th of December, Kunos released the third and final installment of the Porsche Packs for Assetto Corsa. Over the last 2 months, roughly on a monthly basis, we have been receiving these wonderful installments of the Porsche Packs in Porsche's official formal return to sim racing for the first time in over a decade. We have gotten some absolutely incredible Porsche cars, past and present, and now, with the third installment, we have received this, the 1970 Porsche 917K. The K in this car's name derives from the German word for short tail, a solution that Porsche came up with because they were confronted with a little bit of an engineering dilemma. A tail, first of all, in automotive parlance, is an overhang that extends beyond the rear axle. As you can see on this car, we have a considerable overhang, but not as long as some others that we have seen relative to a car's wheelbase in other automotive works of extravagant whatever you want to call them. But yes, the K comes from the German word for short tail, and you can see that short tail right here. The problem that Porsche had with this car was aerodynamic in nature. The 917 was straight out of the box a very fast, very agile car. However, at high speeds coming up to around 150 miles an hour plus, the car became very unstable, and this was due to aerodynamic effects. Consider this as a physics problem. A pendulum, it likes to point down toward the ground because that's where its center of mass is, and it will swing in a very predictable nature as long as that center of mass is pointed downward. However, when you invert a pendulum, all of a sudden, that center of mass is on top, so it has maximum potential energy, no kinetic energy, and is trying all the time to return to that state of rest with that center of mass pointing downward. You can try to balance a pen in the palm of your hand, and you start to understand the problems that this car was having at high speed aerodynamically. There wasn't enough balance in terms of front to rear downforce, therefore the rear end was very unstable and the car approached the realm of undrivability at high speeds. Teaming up with a small racing firm called John Wire Engineering in 1969 and 1970, Porsche conducted some extensive testing at the Österreich Ring, which is now known as the Red Bull Ring, and they came up with the short tail solution, and we can see that on the car today. What the tail does is it allows that airflow to reattach to the center and rear section of the car, thus eliminating that turbulence and spoiled flow that was causing the instability, and return that to a nice, smooth laminar flow across the top side of the car, which could then be directed to the rear wing and to these rear flap spoiler segments, whatever you want to call them, to generate downforce. That solved the balance problems, and then immediately Porsche reaped success with this car. It won the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1970 and gave Porsche their first overall Le Mans victory in so doing. It also went on to dominate sports car racing in 1970 and 1971, winning the World Sports Car Championship in both years. In terms of Assetto Corsa, we received another variant of this car in the first volume of the Porsche Packs, the 917-30. This car you can think of as its more civilized twin brother. It has essentially the same layout as the 917-30, but we do not have turbos on this one. We have, rather than 1,500 absolutely ridiculous horsepower, this car has about 600 horsepower from its 4.9-liter flat 12-cylinder engine. Flat meaning that we have a 180-degree bank angle. The pistons are horizontally opposed 1-to-1 to each other in banks of 6. Therefore, 6 plus 6 is 12, and you get the idea that it's a 12-cylinder engine with a flat plane bank angle. And you can see it there poking out from the center of the bodywork there. That fan on top of the engine, that actually spins when the car is running and out on track. You can't really see it when you're driving, but it does create a very nice effect, and I absolutely love that Kunos included that level of detail on that engine. Speaking of other levels of detail on this car, as we have now come to expect from Kunos, they have done an absolutely immaculate job in every way with this car. You can see, getting in close here, you can see there really aren't too many sharp edges. Absolutely wonderful. Everything is nice and smooth and proportionate all the way around. You see that wonderful grille work there that I first pointed out to all of you when I reviewed the Maserati 250F all those months ago, but you can see that same grille work is there. I absolutely love the level of precision and intricacy that they are able to achieve with the detailing on these cars. It's just great. Also, you can see these quick release fasteners, those wing nut type things that are sticking out from the top of the bodywork there. That is to secure this front body panel. They are not only modeled very well, but they are actually painted in accordance to where they are in relation to the rest of the bodywork and what color that section of the bodywork is. So the one in the center is painted red, and then the others are painted blue, because the rest of the surrounding bodywork is either red or blue in that respective location. Absolutely great. You can see the Porsche badge there front and center, nicely rendered. And then moving to the sides there, you can see those NACA ducts to either side of the headlights, and then you have the headlights themselves. You can see the scoring effects on the outer lens of the headlights. That's from road debris, so sand, some gravel, some small stones, things like that. And that is all nicely rendered. Also, securing the outer plexiglass to the car, you can see screws. And not only are the screws rendered, but the screw heads are rendered. And I can tell you that they are Phillips head screws. Absolutely ridiculous levels of detail here. You can see the vertical bulbs behind those outer lenses, those outer fairings. I assume those are marker lights and indicator lights. They're there. Not only are the bulbs there, but you can see the filaments inside of them. It's just ridiculous. And then, of course, the main headlight there, and you can see the bolt and nut arrangement that is holding that outer lens of the main headlight in place. Just unreal levels of detail. Moving rearward on the car, you can now see the tires. The Firestone logo there, nicely rendered, but also there is some lettering stamped on the side of the sidewall as well in black, so it's a little difficult to see, but it is there. Of course, you can see the tread pattern as well. These are not slick tires. They are, I guess you could describe them as semi-slick. There is a tread on them, but it is very, very shallow, and we saw this in many disciplines in the era. Also, you can see the wheel assembly there, nice powder-coated black, and then behind there is your brake disc, cross-drilled and ventilated. Caliper there sitting on the right side from our perspective of the brake disc. Absolutely great. And you can even see the tire valve stem. Wonderfully modeled. Moving back here on the bodywork, you can see the shut lines where the doors meet up with the rest of the bodywork. Things do not quite match up one-to-one, and I just absolutely love that level of detail. Of course, before the car was assembled, I would assume that most of these body panels were painted separately, and then when it all came together, there had to be mismatches here and there, there it is, modeled. I love it. Absolutely love it. You can see here the E and then the off and the lightning bolt. That is the emergency kill switch that either a driver or a marshal could actuate if something happened out on track and they needed to shut the engine down. There it was, nicely modeled there. Moving to the rear tire, here you can see the tread pattern a bit more clearly. It's a very shallow tread pattern. It's kind of an S diamond shape. Not quite sure how to describe it, but there it is. You can see it. Nicely done. And yeah, maybe you could just make out a little bit of that numbering on the sidewall as well. 9.20.15. Wonderful stuff. In the rear section, you can see the aluminum space frame chassis poking out from the back. This looks very, very similar to the 91730. Of course, these cars are very much related to each other. In many ways, they are the same car, but you can see that there. Also, you can see how open all of this is. Not only does that look good, but it's also indicative of the design philosophy of the era. Engineers had not yet discovered that they could use the underside of a car as an aerodynamic appendage, so everything was just open for reasons of cooling, and it just looks absolutely great for all of us. You can see the backside of the gearbox casing poking out there toward the rear. Absolutely wonderful stuff. Moving to the other side, of course, everything still modeled resplendently on this side. You can see the depth of that blue and red paint in a little bit softer lighting now. This livery obviously is meant to be evocative of the Gulf Oil livery that this car would have raced in. Kunos apparently do not have permission from Gulf Oil Company to render their logo on the car, so I can forgive them, but certainly this livery is evocative of that legendary color scheme. Wonderful. Looking around the cockpit area, you can see the side windows. They would not open entirely. There's a little section in the forward section of the side windows that would open, and you can see that there are even some holes cut into that plexiglass for a little bit of ventilation, and then of course that section would probably open inward, allowing a bit more cooling air to come into the cockpit. And of course, being in showroom view, we can open the doors, and you can see that cockpit a bit more clearly. Very nicely modeled. Front and center there from our perspective, you've got a nice fuse box in there, nicely modeled there with the different sections of fuse panels, and then they're all wired together with multicolored wiring. Absolutely lovely. You can see the driver's seat and the passenger seat in this, so we could technically hold two people, although it would be a very tight squeeze. The driver's seat is much larger, and it's mounted a bit more rearward toward the back of the bulkhead there. Passenger seat mounted more forward, much smaller, and it'd be a very tight squeeze, but perhaps you could manage it. You can also see these big sills running from the outside to the inside. I assume those were also a big section of the fuel tanks on this car, so very safe. The driver is sitting right in the middle of, I don't know, probably 100 or so gallons of fuel. Very, very safe indeed. We can go into the cockpit, of course, have a look at what things look like in there. And here we are. Centrally mounted on the dashboard, big tachometer that measures all the way out to 10,000 RPM. However, you can see the red line is at about 8,200, so in practice the engine does not rev over 8,000 RPM. But I have to say, and we will hear this when we go out on track in a couple of minutes, it just sounds absolutely glorious. Flat 12, there is nothing like it. See the modeling here in the cockpit. Maybe it's a little dim, but you can get a sense of what's going on in here. Big knob over there on the passenger side for the wipers, and then your other toggle switches for your lights and fans and things of that nature. Driver certainly would be able to reach all of those things if need be, but I think it'd be a little bit of a stretch. Moving over to the right-hand side of the cockpit, we'll close the doors just to give you a little bit better sense of the proportions in here. And you can see that wide sill still available as some extra space for the driver even when the door is closed. It only seals on the outer part of the car, the very exterior that panel closes. There's no interior door panel, as it were, so driver still has some space in there, and they've even taken the liberty to pad that sill so his elbow isn't getting beaten to death as he's going around changing gear. Over on this side, you can see the door latch. They have modeled the door latch. It's absolutely amazing. It doesn't move or anything, but if we open the doors again, you can see just the fixed element of the latch remains. Then we close the door, and the latching mechanism on the door actually fits into that hoop section mounted to the bulkhead. Absolutely ridiculous standard of detail on this car. Moving to the rear, you can see the rear window, big plexiglass panel, and funnily enough, it looks like it would open. This little section apparently would slide off to our left and just get a little bit more cross breeze in the cockpit, as it were. Of course, no climate control in this thing, but just a little bit more ventilation for the cockpit, which I imagine would get mighty hot. Moving down, looking at the backside of the bulkhead, some control boxes, probably for the fuel injection, and then panning back around to the front area. Great visibility in this car while you're out on track. Those big front fenders, yes, they are a little bit obstructive in your field of view, but really nothing to worry about. If anything, they help you to place the front end kind of like a gun sight. But great windscreen here, great visibility. Absolutely wonderful stuff. Here you can see the gear lever. That actually moves when you change gear, but in addition to that moving, the shift linkage actually moves as well. You can see this black rod extending rearward from the gear lever. That also moves when the gear lever moves. Just insane attention to detail that Kunos have put into this car. Absolutely amazing stuff. So back on the outside now, take one last look at this thing in showroom view before we go out on track. I have to say, we have only had this car as of this recording for about half a day, but it is just something amazing. It is my favorite car in Volume 3 of the Porsche Pack so far. I've yet to drive all of them, but this one takes the cake by far. It just sounds great. It handles of the era, but it just is such an experience, and really it's the engine sound that completely turns this thing into a truly immersive experience. So we're going to have a look at that in just a few moments. We're going to go off to Spa and throw this thing around and show you what's what. Stand by. Welcome to Spa. Of course, before we get started out on track, we're going to go through the setup screen and show you the kinds of things that we've got to play with. This is our gearbox. We have a 5-speed box in this car. Of the era, of course, you definitely expect to see a 5-speed in a car like this, unlike the 917-30, which has a 4-speed box, but again, that's for high speeds, whatever. You can see you can change first through fifth in addition to the final drive ratio any way you like. We're at Spa, so we want some relatively long gearing. Tires, you've got one compound, the AC V10 vintage tire, and you want to run the pressures reasonably high on these tires. It just tends to be the way it works. Fuel, not as big a fuel tank as you might expect. Of course, it'd be refueling in the races, but 120 liters is the maximum. And if we move over to the rear of the car, watch the fan, roughly center of screen as the engine fires up. The fan starts to spin. Absolutely great. It'd be cool if it actually spooled up rather than just instantaneously reaching its operating speed, but small detail, whatever. Suspension, anti-roll bars front and rear, wheel rates and ride heights. Adjust them any way you like. Aero, the only real aero adjustment you have on the car is at the back. They have the main rear wing, which is the center section of the wing, and then you have the left and right hand side flaps, which you can adjust the angle of attack of as well. These things don't actually move when you adjust these angles, but of course it has an effect. Alignment, camber and toe on all four corners. Dampers, your bound and rebound fast and slow on all four corners. And under generic, we just have brake bias and brake power. We're going to run the default setup, and we're just going to throw some fuel on board and turn some laps. In the cockpit, as we saw in showroom view, there's not a whole lot going on. Just tachometer is the only real readable gauge. And of course you can hear that engine. This engine has an absolutely wonderful sound, and you're all going to hear it, of course, really, really soon. And on the external views later on, you're going to have a chance to hear it a bit more clearly. But it is just, well, you'll find out. Some clatters and bangs from the chassis as we go over the bumps. Oh, yes. There were some full revs for you. 8,000 RPM, 12 cylinders. It just sounds like nothing else. I don't care if it's a V12, a flat 12. When you've got 12 pistons going up and down in harmony, it just produces something that's spectacular. Nice sounds there on the overrun. Some backfires going on. Just a wonderful, harmonious howl from that engine. I love it. I love it to death. My favorite aspect of the engine sound is not actually what you hear on top. In other words, it's not the higher frequency sounds, it's the lower frequency bass sounds, I guess we could call them, that you hear. It's like a major third interval being played in the bass. It's some wonderful harmonics going on. All right, we've got a lap under our belts, and we can start talking about the dynamics. This engine is rated for about 600 horsepower. This is the 4.9 liter variant of the flat 12. Started life as a 4.5 liter engine, and then they bored it out to 4.9 and then through 5 liters. In this spec, it's producing about 600 horsepower. And I would say it's certainly enough for this car. 600 horsepower out of an engine. It's actually a number that's pretty high considering that this car is from 1970. So that's a lot of horsepower for a car this old. As with other cars of the time, it certainly feels that the engine is ahead of the chassis when it comes to how things work. The engine certainly would feel at home in a car from the 80s and even the 90s. If you put this engine in a McLaren F1, it would still feel like a McLaren F1. But in a car that's still got a space frame chassis with a lot of flex going on, plus tires that are 45 years old, it shows its age in those regards. There is understeer all around, and it's not the sort of understeer that we get today, which is usually due to suspension setup or aero settings. It's just tire scrub. It's straight up tire scrub. Just because the tires are what they are, they're not quite slicks and they're not quite treaded, and they don't have the ridiculously space-aged rubber compounds that we're dealing with nowadays. They're just, well, vintage. Tires feel very similar to how they do on the 917-30. So if you've driven that car, you've got an idea of what to expect when you get into this thing. What you don't have, however, is an extra, my God, 900 horsepower to contend with. So the massive amounts of chassis flex and nose lift that you get when you get on the power in the 917-30, pretty much absent in this car. No turbo on this car either, so the power is much more linear and much more direct. No lag to worry about or things like that. The engine's very tractable. Again, because it is a 12-cylinder, it essentially just feels like a turbine. Very smooth, it's not peaky, it's just very linear. You get on the power and it gives you exactly what you ask of it. That's a bit out of shape there. Again, because all your downforce is at the rear, the front end, as I mentioned with the understeer, the front end has a tendency to wash away through the corners. You'd expect this. And of course, you just correct for that as you would normally correct for an understeer situation. Very difficult to spin up the rear tires under acceleration because the gearing is so long and the engine is just so tractable. So you can basically get back on full throttle as soon as you're sure the rear end is not going to go anywhere you don't want it to. Even in second gear there, a little bit of wheel spin, but nothing that's not manageable by any means. Braking performance is most decidedly vintage. Steel brakes, yes, they are cross-drilled and ventilated, so they cool down very nicely, but still of the era. Certainly much better than you would get on a drum brake on a car that was built maybe 10 years prior to this, but yes, still of the era. There's that understeer catching me out a little bit. Just listen to that engine. Oh, it's a glorious noise. Why is it that the Germans always make things that sound nice? I have to say, this is an engine sound that I think Bach might have approved of. It has such a harmonic, almost musical quality to it, even more so than a Ferrari engine. Gearbox, that 5-speed unit, it shifts as fast as you can. No problems there. Once you get underway, the clutch take-up is very light. The bite point happens very early, and it's very fierce. So you don't have to play funny things with the clutch. Throttle response, I wouldn't say it's quite instantaneous, but as I said, it's very direct and proportional to what you're doing with the pedal. Also responds very nicely to heel toe. Blips on the downshifts, very welcome. And of course the engine response is quick enough so that you don't have to have a prolonged stab on the pedal. Overall balance, aside from the understeer, it's neutral. It's certainly not biased to oversteer by any means, even in high-speed corners. See, it's biased to understeer there. Once you're dealing with the understeer, though, no other surprises. It's going to behave like a car of its era. See, through this high-speed corner, we can't stay quite flat, but you can stay at about 50% throttle with no drama. So their work with putting that tail on the car certainly paying dividends for high-speed stability. I love rev matching in this car. It's just that, I think it's that sound again. Little twitch going over the top of radio, just reminding you who's in charge. Squealing from the brakes as the speed bleeds off. Wow, wow, wow. Yes, it's old. And by modern standards, it's slow. It's very slow by modern standards, but it's Porsche's first Le Mans winner. You cannot go wrong with something like that. You need to drive this car. You all need to stop watching this video right now and go pay your $6.99 on Steam and drive this car, because even if you're not quite into vintage racing, even if you're not quite into Porsche, you've got to have a go in this thing. Assetto Corsa is just that kind of a sim that lends itself to all different kinds of automobiles, and this certainly plays right into its overall architecture. It's great. The tracks that you can drive it on are great. I had a video of this going around the 1967 version of Silverstone. Certainly quite appropriate, I felt anyway, and it just feels at home. The only thing I would say is missing from this experience is Kunos You guys need to give us a classic version of Spa, the old layout, with the Mazda kink. Please and thank you. Give you a quick chance here to hear the external sounds. Oh my, oh my. There it is, the 917K. Just an absolutely glorious machine in every possible regard. It's a blast to drive. It's a blast to look at just sitting still. I mean, just look at that shape. Just look at that shape. That tail there, upswept slightly from the rest of the bodywork, absolutely completes it. It's like fine dining mixed with fine architecture mixed with avant-garde music. It is everything, absolutely everything, and then it's just punctuated by that wonderful sound from that flat 12 engine. It's like I said, it's my favorite car in Volume 3 of the Porsche Pack, and I think that if all of you have a go in it, it will fast become your favorite as well. Of course, there are going to be 2 flying laps here at Spa with this car, sans commentary, after the end of this review segment, which is fast approaching. So stay tuned for the hot laps, please, and of course, thank you all very, very much for watching. I hope you liked this one. FerrariMan601 saying thank you very much, and stay tuned for the hot laps.